When we talk about relationship style, we do it all rooted around our predominant needs. So each one of us has predominant needs, and they are hardwired into us, into our brains, based on our personality. So these needs are not things that we decide upon for ourselves. It's not something that we prefer. If you think about it, it's like an appetite, right? Our needs are very much like appetites. And in the same way we get hungry and we get tired and we get thirsty, these needs are just as powerful, right? So we can feel them physiologically, but they, most importantly, they impact in on our behavior because they are rooted in the brain, right? These needs, and why we speak to these needs throughout each one, as we talk about each of the 8 relationship styles, as we talk about it through the lens of leadership or career, however you want to come at it, these needs that we have, this predominant need in particular, must be met in order for us to grow and develop into the person we are meant to be. And that's a fact. And when it comes to looking at it from the perspective of relationships, this need must be met in order for us to feel satisfied. So if you're in relationships with others, again, at work or at home, where you feel dissatisfied, but you can't quite put your finger on it, it's like you know something's there, but you can't quite name it, chances are it's because your needs are not being satisfied. And when we understand those needs, we can actually work to negotiate to get those needs met. It's very, very important. And a lot of us don't necessarily know what they are. If we've never looked at our relationship style, we've never thought about it through the lens of personality, we just might not be aware of what those needs are, and therefore what it is that we need to do, we need to make sure of is happening in our relationships in order for us to feel satisfied, right? Because we want to have really satisfying and relationships in which we truly do thrive. When our needs are not met, what happens is that it forces us to become self-protective. It keeps us living in the imposter syndrome, and it ultimately gets in the way of our happiness. And so we end up adapting, and what happens is there's a predictable set of self-protective behaviors that get triggered. Okay, but depending on our relationship style, that set of behaviors is going to be different. Okay, but these self-protective behaviors that get triggered in our relationship style actually contribute to dysfunction in our relationships and perpetuate that level of dissatisfaction that we are experiencing, right? Because we can't quite get out of it when we're coming into our relationships out of our self-protective place. So we're talking today about the stabilizer. And so the stabilizer is the, again, in Myers-Briggs language, it is the ISTJ or the ISFJ. We talk about the stabilizer. It is rooted in the left emotional brain, which is the experiencing part of the brain, like the adventurer that I talked about last week, the ESTP and the ESFP. The stabilizer is all about the experience. But the difference is that this predominant function in the stabilizer is introverted, and so they're driven by a need to be secure. And what that need to be secure is all about, it is really about doing the same thing over and over again. It is about consistency in experience. So whereas the adventure we talked about was all about diversity and variety and spontaneity, because that's their need, the stabilizer is the opposite. They actually need to have that predictability, that knowing that that next step I take is the same as the step I took before, that the way I'm doing it tomorrow is the same way I did it today and the same way that I've done it in the past. And so their need to be secure really is an important one to understand, because when that need is frustrated, just like the same for all of their relationship styles, it really does shut them down. And their behavioral set and where they move to when they're being self-protective is very, very different from what we've seen when we talked about the adventure last week. Okay, so what does it mean? What does it mean to have, what's the relationship style of the stabilizer? Well, first and foremost, again, that need to be secure. So what does that mean? Responsible, dependable, hardworking. These are the people with a really, really strong sense of duty, and they will do the right things. Very black and white in their orientation by nature, and so they look at the relationships from that perspective as well, in that what do I need to do and how do I need to get it done and how do I make sure I get it done right. They are adverse to change, okay? So the need to be secure means it has to be the same. It needs to be, I need to know what I'm doing. I need to know that I can be successful in it. They're seeking stability and predictability in all aspects of their life. So if you go up to a stabilizer and say, hey, let's go on a trip last minute, it's going to be like, no, wait a minute, right? And change, they don't like change imposed upon them. They can work themselves up to their own degree of change in their relationships, in their personal setting, in their professional setting. But when it comes to having change imposed upon them, it really frustrates their need. They're highly, highly committed and loyal individuals. We always say they're last to leave the sinking ship. They're traditional in their orientation, they're hierarchical, and they show their caring. They show the importance of their relationship through doing. Okay? So it is an activity-based approach to the relationship, and if they do these things, if they tick those things off their list, then that is their way of showing you that they care. They are emotionally detached in their approach, again, a little bit more task-focused, and they are very, very conflict avoidant, right? Because, of course, interpersonal conflict really does frustrate their need to feel secure. When we look at this style, there's a couple of things that you really want to know. First and foremost, that these are folks that are friends for life, right? They're the ones that have the same friends today as they had in high school or even grade school, and they really do stick to a small group of friends, but they stick really closely to that particular group of friends, right? So they keep those friendships for life. That's very important. They're private and introverted. They don't spend a lot of time thinking about or talking about their emotions. They really don't talk about their dreams or their hopes for the future. They're much more realistic and practical, and they really focus on the usefulness of things. And so in their interactions, in their relationships, it's the same thing. Is this useful to me? Is this not useful to me? Okay. And they can unintentionally, as a result of this, because of their lack of emotional sensitivity, their more private orientation themselves, they can actually unintentionally discourage others from sharing their thoughts and ideas. They work behind the scenes. So these are the folks that are not up front and center. They're very much working behind the scenes in order to make sure things get done, but they are productive. But they need predictability. They need to take care of others. That's really important to them, having those tasks, having that way in which to support. My stepfather is a stabilizer, and it's always the thing we say is to make sure that we give him the opportunity to take care of us and to help us and to show appreciation for that, because that meets his needs. And of course, all of us that have a preference to sometimes wanting to be doing it and sharing it and contributing to in that way, took a little bit of getting used to say, no, he really needs this. This is really important to him, that ability to take care of all of us and to take care of his grandchildren and to be really productive for us. And so we make sure that we provide him with those opportunities to do that. Very satisfying for him in his relationships, and that works for us as well. So that's important. We find those places where we can, okay? They need clear expectations, though, is the other thing. It's always making sure that they know the rules. They want to get things right. They can be quite black and white and very traditional. And so if the rules are different or the rules are changing, you have to be clear on those expectations. So need dissatisfiers are interactions, conversations, activities that you have with others that actually get in the way, for the stabilizer, get in the way of their need to feel secure. And it makes it hard, really, really hard, when these dissatisfiers are present to feel that sense of satisfaction. And if they are present, we are more likely to get easily irritated, depressed, angered, frustrated, find fault in others, pick fights, and engage in other non-productive or self-protective behaviors, as I said before. So we're always watching for these need dissatisfiers, and if we're aware of them for ourselves, or if we're in a relationship or we work with someone who is a stabilizer and we're aware that these need dissatisfiers are creeping up, we can see the change in their behavior, and we want to think about what are some of the things that we might be able to do in order to minimize or eliminate these need dissatisfiers. Now, of course, for a stabilizer, one of them for them is to be taken for granted, because one of the things, as I was saying, is they really do like to take care of others, but often others can fail to appreciate and to recognize. If I go back to the example with my stepfather, is we're always really, really clear about how much we appreciate and how grateful we are. And there's always, and my kids were raised with that. It's like, don't take it for granted. He does this. This is the role he performs in our family, but we never take it for granted. We always show that consistent appreciation for it, okay? Because again, they're working from that place of duty and responsibility, but if nobody's noticing, nobody's aware, then they will, they will start to feel taken advantage of, right? We don't want to see that happen. The other big one, of course, as a need dissatisfier for the stabilizer, the ISTJ, the ISFJ, is change. Stabilizers like what is familiar to them, and change creates anxiety because of the uncertainties around the rules, around the role, around how it's all going to work. And in new situations, they simply don't know what's expected of them, okay? And they want to know what the new experience is going to create for them in terms of sensation, experience. And so they will often say no, right? And no is the first thing that comes up because of that resistance to the change. And so they tend to also, when you start talking about change, they tend to catastrophize. They'll come up with all the reasons why it's not going to work or that it can't be done, and think of worst case scenarios, right? And so they can appear in the relationship to be sticks in the mud, but really not. It's fear. And those fears that get triggered around change because of their need to be secure can cause them to limit their activities and try and even limit the activities of others around them, right? Where they're keeping their world small, and they'll try and get you to keep your world small as well. So keep in mind, if you have stabilizer as your second, so if you're an ESTJ, if you are an ESFJ, so stabilizer will be your second, you can end up doing the same thing if this particular need is not being satisfied for you, right? And then the last piece in terms of need dissatisfiers is emotionality. Emotional expression to a stabilizer is unpredictable and it's unnecessary, okay? They internalize their emotions and they aren't always aware of what they're feeling, and they don't necessarily communicate that out anywhere. So they would really prefer if everyone around them interacted in that same sort of unaffected, unemotional way. So if there's a lot of emotional expression, they can really struggle with it. And that can feel, if you're in a relationship with a stabilizer, you may end up feeling like they're not hearing you, they're not being empathetic, or that you feel like you can't bring these things to them, okay? Because they will withdraw and they will avoid spending time with people if there's too much emotionality. And that can often leave the conflict unresolved, and we don't want to see that happen. But that's the place and the space that stabilizers will go to, so just be aware of. So those are the three key things with a stabilizer that are need dissatisfiers: emotionality, too much change, and not being appreciated or being taken advantage of, or feeling like they're being taken advantage of. So when our needs are not being met in our relationships, we always talk about the fact that we shift into self-protective behaviors, and there are some very clear self-protective behaviors that you can always observe with the stabilizer. First and foremost, when they are being self-protective, they're going to expect everyone else to behave just like them. And that may be even relating, saying, well, when I was a child, I didn't do that, or I didn't say that, or I behaved like this. It's again, that's their frame of reference, and they will ask people or expect people to conform to their rules, regulations, or they will judge others and dismiss others who don't work to that idea that they have, or those rules that they have. And they don't always share those rules. Like sometimes those rules are just up in their heads, right? The other thing that they will do, and you'll find, and this is a key sign that if you're in a relationship with a stabilizer, or you're a stabilizer yourself, that you're in your self-protective system, is there's a resistance to change and to trying new things. So sticking with what you know, taking the same route all the time, going to the same places, having activities planned in advance, not being able to be spontaneous, and getting upset if those plans deviate. So that you see that keeping that world small and tight and rigid are all indications that the stabilizer is working from the self-protective system of the brain. The other thing is that they will start to go into a place of being excessively focused on the importance of what they're doing and not have any tolerance for being interrupted. They'll get angry or they'll get frustrated, and you'll find that they're having to work in a really sequenced way of getting one thing done, then the next thing done, then the next thing done. So again, that loss of flexibility, that increase in rigidity are all indications that the stabilizer is stuck in the self-protective system. They also have difficulty thinking about future plans without moving into into catastrophizing. And so literally saying, you know, they complain about a problem, you give them a solution, and they'll tell you all the reasons why it's not going to work and all the reasons why it's going to fail, which leaves them stuck, right? And they literally can get stuck. We sometimes say that they get stuck in the loop within their heads, but they can't, you know, sort of move out of the place where they're in, and they treat their current reality as being unchangeable, right? And so they don't plan. They don't plan at all, and they start acting as though what they fear is a reality, and it immobilizes them from moving forward. And all of this, basically, when we think about sort of the most obvious things with the stabilizer, it always comes back to resisting change, staying within their comfort zone, holding rigidly to what is familiar to them, even when that what is familiar is no longer useful or no longer serving them or no longer practical. They can become rebellious and resistant, really resistant when there's too much uncertainty, too much change, and ultimately they can become passive aggressive, saying yeah, and then not actually doing what they agreed to do with you. So again, all really important considerations. If you're a stabilizer yourself, ISTJ, ISFJ, or if you are in a relationship with them. So if you're a stabilizer yourself, these are tips that you can take to your partner, to your children, to your in-laws. I always say my in-laws because they always make the best stories. Your employees, your coworkers, and say, this is what I need in order to be most effective, most successful, and for us to have the most productive and satisfying relationship. If you are in a relationship with a stabilizer, these are some key things that you want to know and be thinking about in order to make sure that you are meeting the needs of the stabilizer, because again, that ensures that they will have the most satisfying relationship, and you will keep them from moving into their self-protective system. First of all, don't expect them to be more social or more relational than they are. Okay, they have a limit to how much time they can spend interacting with people, and you really have to kind of recognize that and appreciate that. Being clear on expectations, right? And being okay with taking on the role of the leader. Stabilizers follow. That part of the brain is focused on following the orders, following the rules, following the steps, following the plan, right? And so if you're not giving them something to follow and you're looking to them to lead you, you're going to have to make that shift, because you're only going to be frustrated, right? And I know from my own experiences, it can be frustrating even trying to collaborate, because again, they don't necessarily generate options or possibilities. And so you're having to say, here's what I want to do. How do we get there, right? And so it's looking at how you collaborate them, especially with them in the workplace. But even I know we talk about it in our family all the time about just trying to plan a trip. And there are, you know, a couple of us that are going to step in and leave that process, because we can't necessarily, you know, sort of engage in that level of collaborative brainstorming kind of conversation, because that's not what stabilizers do. If you are having to do change and you're trying to introduce change, introduce it in small increments. We talk about socializing it, planting little seeds in order to build up their readiness for it, and really do understanding that change for them destabilizes them, and it absolutely thwarts their need for security. So you cannot say, well, it's not that big a deal, right? But for them, even little changes are a big deal, okay? And don't take their resistance personally. This is especially true in the workplace, because, you know, a lot of times when we see folks that are resistant to change, we either make it about them, or we make it about, you know, what have I done wrong, that they're not following me, or is my idea good enough? But really understanding that for them, it's an emotional need. It's emotional need in the same way, you know, hunger means I need food. Thirst means I need something to drink. The need for security means I have to seek that out no matter what in order for me to feel psychologically safe, right? And so what happens is persistence over resistance, right? So they gain confidence over time, and then you will work them through it. But if you expect them to do leaps, they do everything incrementally in steps. And we always say it's black and white. What do they do? What do they stop doing in order to be able to move them along, okay? Learn to approach your relationships from more of a logical, fact-based approach than leading with emotion, okay? Because if you want, you know, if you really want to get a conversation, have a meaningful conversation with them, coming at it in a way that's emotionally charged, where you're pushing around interpersonal conflict, they're just going to shut down. They're going to shut down, they're going to withdraw, they're going to check out around it, and that's likely to increase how you're feeling and your emotionality, and then it again continues to kind of create that gap. Instead, trying to come at it from a logical, fact-based perspective, focus on what the behavior was, what the impact was, how things could be done differently. And you see how I'm laying it out. Here are the steps, here's the sequence in order to be able to get them. Come prepared to problem solve with options and really, really, really working to minimize the emotionality in your approach, okay? Because you're going to get the best result from them, the best conversation, the best move forward. When it comes to habits, rituals, really be clear on your own. They can have a little bit of a tendency to bulldoze. I'm going to go back just because it's fun telling stories about my stepfather right now. But I remember when I first moved with my kids to Toronto and we were sort of integrating Christmas time. And he had a number of traditions that we hadn't ever exposed our kids to, and it was interesting. And some of them I thought were absolutely great, and it was a huge great addition. But there was this one watching this particular Christmas movie, and it was a part of his tradition, and so we had to do it every single year. And it was probably my least favorite Christmas movie, but I never said anything because he was so adamant around his tradition that it felt like there was no sort of room to negotiate. And it's funny, a couple of years ago, I started saying, we watch something else, and then others were starting to say, yeah, it'd be really good to watch something else. And he was okay with it, but it was a little bit of having to challenge it because they get so stuck in their particular approach and their particular rituals. It's again, they want to do the same thing over and over again. They want to have the same experience over and over again. That is what allows them to feel safe and to feel secure. And so if you're in a relationship with a stabilizer, it's just really important to be aware of these couple of things, right? Provide them with clear expectations, introduce change slowly, come after issues from a really logical perspective, you focusing on the facts, and be firm in asserting your own traditions and your own rituals and working with them in order to negotiate so that you are able to get your needs met, as well as making sure that they're getting their needs met in the process.